Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for making time and joining us for this very important conversation. My name is Helen Iris Torres. I'm the Executive Director of HOPE, Hispanas Organized for Political Equality, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Campaign for College Opportunities outreach to both Lieutenant Governors candidates, but also all the work they've been doing about informing Californians about the importance of our higher education system. So at this time, when our state is making bold policy changes to ensure the future success of our students and our economy, California's next lieutenant governor has the unique privilege to make a lasting impact on higher education for generations to come. Our state needs bold leadership. By 2030, California must produce 1.7 million more college degrees and credentials in order to meet the workforce demands, and we're not on track to do so. Even more worrisome is that 52% of white students completed a college-ready curriculum with a C or better, compared to 34% for Blacks and 37% for Latino students. We must close this racial and equity gaps and ensure that our next lieutenant governor can help us change this. The lieutenant governor, as most of us know, serves as a member of the University of California Board of Regents and the California State University Board of Trustees. These are critical decision-making bodies in California. They have a vote on critical issues from access, completion, tuition, and more. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. Senator Hernandez grew up in La Puente, attended both Rio Hondo and Mount St. Antonio Community College before obtaining a BS degree in biology from Cal State Fullerton. He received a scholarship to optometry at Indiana University, which is where he met his wife, Diane. And I just had a great pleasure of meeting Diane and speaking to her. Her and I are Midwest folks. So I'm from Michigan, her being from Indiana. So it's a pleasure to have you here tonight. After returning home, Dr. Ed and his wife set up their first practice in his hometown of La Puente. As an optometrist and a local businessman in predominantly low-income communities, Dr. Ed Hernandez ran for office to improve access to health care. Dr. Hernandez was first elected to the Assembly in November 2006 and was re-elected in November 2008. Congratulations. He won his seat in the California State Senate in November 2010 and was re-elected once again in 2014. So far, a pretty good track record. Senator Hernandez serves as chair for the Senate Committee on Health and also co-chairs the Senate Committee on Legislative Ethics. He is also a member of the Business Professions and Economic Development Committee and the Senate Insurance Committee. Senator Hernandez is the vice chair of the San Gabriel Valley Legislative Caucus that is made up of 12 senators and assembly members representing the greater San Gabriel Valley. Very short bio for a man that's very accomplished. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. My next introduction is to someone that we all know, and quite frankly, I could say we all love, is Michelle Siqueiros, one of the most accomplished Latina leaders I know. Michelle grew up in Los Angeles and was first in her family to graduate from college, thanks to federal, state, and college financial aid. She is passionate about the power of college to change lives and the power of public policy making to expand or constrain college opportunities. As president of the Campaign for College Opportunity, Michelle works to expand access and success in college for California students by raising public attention on the critical challenges facing higher education, mobilizing a broader coalition of supporters, and influencing policymakers. There's a lot more about her accomplishments, but I think what we all know is that you need a passionate leader like Michelle to ensure that quality education is at the forefront of California policymakers. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. I was just sharing, Senator Hernandez, that I'm in a room full of people that I admire and I love in terms of the work that they do. We're surrounded by student leaders. I'm really proud that I'm a college advocate as the first in my family to go to college. But honestly, when I was in college, I was just super paranoid that I wouldn't even graduate because I felt so overwhelmed by the experience. And so to all the student leaders who not only do the incredible hard work that is in front of you in your courses, but you still make time to have a voice and represent the rest of your student body. Thank you for joining us as co-sponsors to the UCSA, CSSA, and the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. Thank you for being here today. And I'm really excited that we're going to do this town hall format. So I'm going to ask the first couple of questions, and then our student leaders are going to ask you the most important questions in this election season, and we're excited to hear from you. So thank you again, Senator Hernandez, for joining us for this conversation and this forum. As you heard Helen introduce her remarks, she talked about just the real workforce needs and challenges facing the state of California. The campaign, along with our coalition partners, many of whom are here today, have really said that California needs to be really bold, courageous, and ambitious about setting a goal for higher education. We believe that it should be 60% of all Californians deserve to have some certificate or post-secondary credential or degree. And we also know that in order for that to happen, we have to close the racial gaps that exist. 69% of our current student body in our colleges and universities are students of color, and we need more of them to complete college and graduate in order to keep our economy strong. So I'm interested in hearing from you about, first, why do you want to run for Lieutenant Governor, and how might you be bold and courageous in articulating an agenda for our state?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, but also let me thank all of you out here. I had an opportunity to meet some of you, but I really want to stay here after and meet most of you, and the most fun I had was, guess who? Talking to the students. It was just the best time. Why do I want to run for Lieutenant Governor? So what I'd like to do first is to tell you my story, because talking to a lot of these students, we have so much in common that you can't even imagine. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I grew up in the city of La Puente. How many of you guys know where La Puente is? All right, see, everybody knows where La Puente is. You know, and I'll tell you, I'm going to be honest with you. I had attitude in high school, I had no direction, and I had what I would call my lost years, where I wasn't doing anything, okay? And then something really special happened to me. I became a teen parent. And I'll tell you what happened when that occurred. The light bulb turned on, because I knew I had a responsibility to raise a child and pay, get her through life. So I went back to school and took school very seriously. But here's my journey, and I'm talking to some of these incredible young students here. They have similar kinds of journeys in the sense that I had to go to community college first. I was talking to a young lady that I asked her, why community college? She says, because she can save money. Well, the same reason for me. Look, I got head shaking. I had to work 30 to 35 hours a week, attend community college, and guess what? Cal Grants, student loans, okay? Then I transferred to Cal State Fullerton. And I chose the Cal State system for me because it was less expensive than the UC system. I lived in the San Gabriel Valley, and I chose Cal State Fullerton. I bet you never guess why I chose Cal State Fullerton. Going against traffic. Right? No offense. Who's here from Cal State LA? I know there's some Cal State. I was going to go to Cal State LA, but in La Puente I'm going west and all that traffic in the morning, right? Right? Economics, work, traffic. These are the things that you've got to do. Same thing. Cal Grants, loans, etc. And I was fortunate to get a scholarship to Indiana University School of Optometry, where I became an optometrist. Met my beautiful wife of 33 years, and we came back and met our life here. I said, look, I've got my daughter back home, and we've been here ever since. But here's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. I never imagined I'd run for office. The only thing I ever did politically is I voted on a regular basis, I read the newspaper, and I watched the news. But as an optometrist, I got angry. And I'm talking to a lot of students out here, and I said, get angry and get engaged. I got angry because of the healthcare system we had, and I ran for office. Well, guess what happened? I not only got elected to the Assembly, became chair of the Senate Health Committee. I have been instrumental in the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and have been able to bring access to care to more people in this state. But here's the reason, the biggest reason. I wanted to share that story of me, of why I went to college and how I succeeded. I believe that a public education in this country is the cornerstone to democracy, but a college degree is the greatest equalizer, the absolute greatest, because where else? I'm the first in my family to graduate as well. My grandfather came to this country from Mexico with a third grade education, toiled in the fields, became a construction worker. My dad was a factory worker. Where else can somebody like me of modest means go to school, get a bachelor's degree, graduate, become a doctor, open up a practice, run for office, and hopefully become the next lieutenant governor, only in this country? So the short answer is I want to take all of those skills that I've learned the last 12 years legislating, take it to the lieutenant governor's office, and you talked about bold changes. I want to make sure that my next 8 years, if I get elected, is to put in to make sure that we make education, higher education, the #1 priority for the state of California. And here's the reason why, is if you look at the economic success of this state, it is through higher education, and because we're the 5th largest economy in the world, it's the economic success of this country. And that's why. You also talked about statistics of individuals, communities of color, underrepresented students that don't go to college. Well, guess what? We have to do something, and we have to knock down those barriers. I'm going to give you some examples of what I did in the legislature to address that. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful. I did 4 attempts, 2 statutory changes to repeal Proposition 209. 2 times I tried to put it on the ballot, and each time I just got hit back. But I know what it is to legislate, and I'm not afraid to take on tough issues. And I'm going to tell you, this is the best fight to have. And I'm angry, and I want all of you angry because we need to change something. Okay?
So let's talk about Prop 209. I think it is a good example of not being afraid of taking on important issues. Prop 209, as many of you know, in 1996 was the initiative that repealed affirmative action. So it banned the use of affirmative action in higher education and hiring, in admissions. Tell us why you wanted to repeal it, and what do you think about it now? What would you do moving forward?
So what happened pre-209 and post-209, we had a huge decrease in the number of communities of color and individuals that are applying, whether it's African American, Latino, Filipino, American Indian, individuals who normally don't go to college. There was a huge drop. Now, what I'm saying is if we look at addressing it, we need to look at using race as one element of it. I'm not saying to give preferential treatment at all, because the courts say we can't. But you have to use race as consideration, and we have to have that conversation. And I believe that California, not only our educational system, but our workforce should reflect what? It should reflect our demographics, and it should look like you guys, and it's not. And so that's the reason why I've tried to address it, and the reason why I think we need to continue to talk about it.
And so how would you work with the governor? What is your strategy if you're elected lieutenant governor for working with our next governor?
Well, first of all, I hope it's Gavin Newsom. I'm going to be honest. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm very partisan. I wanted to be Gavin Newsom. So here's what I'm going to do. I have worked 12 years in the legislature, so I've built long-standing relationships in both sides of the aisle, in the Assembly and the Senate, whether it's the chair of the Budget Committee like Holly Mitchell, the Pro Tem Atkins, the Speaker Anthony Rendon. And what I want to do is I will work very closely and build a working relationship with Governor Newsom. I'm going to give you an example. About 3 weeks ago, I talked to him and we had a very nice conversation. And the first thing he says, we're going to have to do something about this cold ice relationship between the governor and lieutenant governor. That's what he told me. And I says, great. I hope that I get elected, and if I do, I want to support you in everything that you do, but I want to be a partner. So what I've learned in the legislature is partnering and learning how to work with coalitions to get things done. And I will work with this governor to make sure that we make it a priority, education being a priority.
So I think Gavin Newsom is on the record as saying that the lieutenant governor should have more power. Mm-hmm. Did you broach that topic with him?
Every time I see him. Every time I see him. Okay.
Wonderful. I'd like to invite one of our first students, Maria Manjares. She's a student at USC. We
Okay.
will not hold that against you, Maria, as a faithful Bruin. Actually, I love many Trojans, including Audrey here. I always have to tell folks when they ask, where do I work? I'm like, you know, the old Transamerica building, the
Right.
old AT&T building, because the last thing I want to say is
The USC.
USC building. Maria, welcome. She's also a commissioner on the California Student Aid Commission,
Okay,
so
thank you.
very important role.
Thank you, Maria.
So California is ranked 49th in the nation in providing direct access to the state's public four-year universities for its students. The California Master Plan for Higher Education of 1960 reserved seats at the CSU and UC systems for only the top 33% of high school students. However, today, more students are qualified to attend a CSU and UC, resulting in thousands of qualified students being turned away and an overly competitive admissions environment for Californians hoping to attend the UC. So my question is, if elected, would you work to revisit admissions caps for CSU and UCs to increase access for qualified students? How else would you work to ensure all qualified Californians have a spot in our public universities through the budget and through public policy? Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, I would do it to address it. But here's how we have to do it. You had mentioned the master plan. The master plan was put into effect in 1960 when the first Governor Brown was governor. We all know what the purpose of it was? The purpose of the master plan is we had a lot of young individuals that were qualified to go to college. Actually, believe it or not, back then, a higher percentage than the rest of the country. And the first Governor Brown wanted to figure out how we create a university system for the 1960s. Well, guess what? This is not the 1960s. In 1960, we had 20 million people. Now we have 40 million people. The California today looks nothing like the California in the 1960s. California today looks very diverse. It looks like everybody in this room. That's why we have to address the master plan. The other thing, too, is we have a community college system, we have a CSU system, and we have a UC system, and none of those fit in the USC system. But the point is, we educate in silos. What we have to do is we have to figure out how all three of the systems communicate to make sure that all students that want to go through and graduate, that we can be able to get those students to graduate. But how will I be able to do it? Going back to my experience in the legislature, after 12 years of all the relationships buildings I have is to go to Holly Mitchell, to talk to her about making sure that we fully fund our education, talk to the pro tem, talk to the speaker. That absolutely has to be a priority to make sure we get all those students in to our college admission system. But it has to start off with a strategic plan of how we're going to address the new master plan, but also the first thing you mentioned, you had asked me about Governor Newsom. I'm already saying he's governor. But the first thing I'm going to talk to him, if I get elected, is to restore the budget so that we can coordinate all three of the systems. This current Governor Brown has vetoed every time the amount of money they've done that for the coordination, and we also have to look at transparency and as well as statistics of these individuals, these young individuals are going to go through the system.
So we are very supportive of a coordinating body. We believe that's critical to the future of our state. How can you even have a 60% attainment goal and no institutional accountability for that goal, and how the UCs and the community colleges and the Cal States work better together? So are you endorsing a restoration of CPEC funding? Do you
Yes.
have another proposal?
Yes, by all means, and I like I said, the first thing we need to do is talk to the new administration, make us, all of us, collectively get them to understand that this is a priority. That's got to be the first thing right out of the bat.
Does your strategy change if it's Governor Cox instead of Governor Newsom?
Well, if it's Governor Cox, I probably won't have a budget, and I'll probably be relegated to a closet, but the strategy would be the same. Let me tell you something. What I believe in and the fire I have in my belly, that this is the most important thing, and I'm telling you my story, is I don't care who's governor, this will be my absolute highest priority, higher education.
So I'm going to invite a second student, Veronica Garcia Martinez, to ask a question. She's currently the student body president at Cal State LA and serves on the Cal State Student Association board.
California currently funds its system of higher education on an annual basis in response to budget requests from the institutions themselves, which leaves very few options for long-term planning. What do you think are the strengths and shortcomings of the current higher education funding model? And what are your thoughts on transitioning to a multi-year funding model that could provide families and our colleges and universities with more stability?
So first of all, it's going to be very difficult to have a multi-year budgeting process because we currently have a calendar year budgeting process in the state legislature. Obviously, that'd be something to have a conversation. But here's the dilemma, and here's what I think what needs to be done to address that exact question. The problem we have right now is that higher education is totally dependent on the general fund. Whenever we have good economic times, guess what? There is enough money to go around, but you're competing with everybody else. Health and Human Services, believe it or not, even though Prop 98 passed, you're still competing with K through 12. And this year, I advocated as well with my colleagues to totally restore the CSU and the UC, which we did. But what's going to happen if there's a recession in 2, 3, or 4 years? Guess who gets cut? It's going to get higher education. And I remember that when I first got elected in the last recession, it was horrible to make those cuts. Here's what we have to do. And this is not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take all of us in this room who are stakeholders in higher education. We have to have a conversation with the public, and we have to find a revenue source outside of the general fund. And maybe even possibly having a conversation with business, and of course a conversation with our faculty as well. Because we have to build a system of education for the 21st century to be able to fuel our economy for the future. And I think by having that conversation, we are guaranteed that we can continue to have revenue that comes in that addresses everything from pipeline to access to workforce to economic empowerment in the future, and have that conversation be part of how we address the demographics of the state.
So what kind of revenue sources are you talking about?
Well, if you think about the public and what they're willing to spend, if they know it's going to go to a cause, and that cause is higher education, that could be a ballot initiative. And that's not going to happen overnight. A ballot initiative that would go strictly for higher education, because what happens whenever there's a recessionary period, I can guarantee higher ed's going to get cut again. And that is something I'm willing to have a conversation with the new administration, the legislature, and stakeholders.
Great. So just a note to everybody in the audience that you will have an opportunity to ask questions too. There's some index cards. If you have a question, jot it down and pass it back to Linda in the back of the room. I'm going to invite Genesis Hara to join us. Genesis is the student body president at Cal State Long Beach and also serves on the board of the Cal State Student Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me and for allowing me to ask a question. So as we all know, CSU affordability issues are very large for students in the CSU system. However, these affordability challenges aren't just because tuition and fees. They're much more complex than that. And we know that 60% of CSU students actually get their tuition paid for through the Cal Grant. And in fact, students who receive a Cal Grant throughout their college career end up graduating with the same amount of debt as students who did not receive the Cal Grant throughout their college career. And in addition, 11% of students in the CSU system are homeless. So when evaluating the total cost of attendance for a CSU student, it's much more than just tuition, and their biggest expense tends to be housing. So if you were giving $100 million to address the system-wide affordability issue, how would you direct it to be spent?
Well, first of all, if I had $100 million, I would love to have it, but it actually would take a lot more than $100 million. Okay. Again, comparing the 1960s to now, it's a much different culture and it's a much different population. And yes, California has done a great job in being able to make it more affordable through Cal Grants, but we have to look at other things. Housing. You have to look at food. We have problems with food insecurity right now, where individuals don't have enough food. I've read articles where you have kids that are homeless. We have to deal with homeless problems. When I think about food insecurity, I can think about myself when I was in graduate school. Guess what I used to do in graduate school? I used to be the person that used to show up to every single happy hour. Seriously.
It wasn't for the booze.
It was. That's most of the time where I ate. No, this is where I would get my meals a lot of times. And then when I met my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she was a resident assistant, and she used to get me passes to the cafeteria. That was exciting.
You knew the way. You knew the way to his heart. I see.
It hasn't changed.
But the point is, there are other factors that will make kids successful to get through school. Guess what else? Mental health issues. There's a lot of problems going on with mental health. I've been working decades, especially with the 10 essential health benefits, to be able to get those services. We need to look strategically, what is it going to take to get kids to be successful to get through school? And guess what most of those kids are? Those are the kids that are going to community college. Those are the kids who come from poor working class communities. This is what we've got to do. And yes, I totally agree that we have to look at a much bigger package.
Great. So I want to invite Alejandro Lomelli up. He is a community college transfer student from Long Beach City to Long Beach State and has been a community college activist and leader for many years now.
Awesome, thank you. So I was happy to hear that you are also part of the community college family, right? That's how we kind of see it. But when we think of community colleges, we see some barriers along the way. So only 40% of California community college students earn a degree, certificate, or transfer after 6 years. Many of the barriers students face, which keep them from reaching their career goals, are put in place by the colleges themselves. A broken remedial education system, a confusing transfer maze, a lack of structured major pathways, and limited student supports are largely responsible for low completion rates. So if elected, what priorities do you have for improving pathways through community college? And how do you plan to support community colleges to improve their own pathways?
Breaking down barriers. That is the absolute first thing we have to do. Example, the college admission test, addressing Proposition 209, looking at the budget for community colleges, especially for community college when it comes to whether it's Cal Grants, but how do we include everything I talked about earlier, whether it's food insecurity, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation. We need to have the resources for the kids that need it the most. And to me, that's how we're going to do it. And it's going back to your initial statement. We have to have bold solutions to make changes for the state.
Great. I'd like to invite Jamie Kernick. He's a student at UCLA. She's a student at UCLA, sorry, because we had to have a Bruin as well, obviously. And she's a leader at UCSA, so thank you, Jamie.
So UCSA's question for you is, how do you envision using your position as Lieutenant Governor to empower and support undocumented students from throughout the state to be successful within and also graduate from California's institutions of higher education, such as CCs, the CSUs, and UCs?
Exactly the way I've been governing this last 12 years. But I want to share something with you. I met a young lady here. I think her name is Torres. Where is she? From UC Merced. Oh, there she is. This young lady just really, really impressed me because her and I are both angry about what's going on in this country right now. Okay. I have never in my entire life have seen so much division. The attack on women, the attack on the environment. You have a president that's saying, build a wall. People who come from Mexico are rapists and drug dealers. That is not what this country is about. It's not about dividing. It's about bringing people together. But I will tell you, serving in the California State Legislature, the California Legislature is all about, at least I believe it is, our values. It's about welcoming everybody and embracing the diversity of this state. So to answer your question, the way I governed, I voted, and I was on the Senate floor when my colleagues, Kevin De Leon and Ricardo Lara, got the Alejo bill through for undocumented drivers for licenses. I voted on SB 54, the sanctuary state law. I voted to get DACA students to be able to get scholarships and be able to go to college. We have to do everything we can to get young individuals who want to be in this country, like this young lady here, and give them all the support. So my answer to you is I will do it the way I've governed, and I walk the walk and I talk the talk. And as your Lieutenant Governor, I will be the exact same fearless fighter to be able to do that for everybody who wants to go to college.
Thank you. And thank you for coming from UC Merced all the way down here. And I see friends from UC Riverside. And I know folks came from Victor Valley because Adam Capps is going to ask the next question. And he's a community college student from Victor Valley and a leader in the Student Senate for the community college system.
Hi, thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. Earlier this year, the Campaign for College Opportunity released Left Out, a report assessing the lack of racial and gender diversity on California's California's college campuses. The report found that campus leadership is overwhelmingly white and male, despite 69% of college students being students of color and a majority being women. When students of color, in particular, attend our public colleges and universities, they often feel isolated. They see few other students who look like them, and even fewer faculty and staff who look like them. We know from research that students of color have improved rate of success when faculty and college leadership is racially diverse. As a voting member on the UC Board of Regents and the CSU Board of Trustees, how will you ensure that California's college and university leadership reflect the racial and gender diversity of our college-age population? Will you be a leader on racial and gender equity in the state's public colleges and universities to ensure diverse faculty, academic senates, and college leaders are more representative of the students they serve? If so, what is your plan for doing so?
First of all, nobody should be left out. And that's all we've been talking about is how the face of California is today. So here's what I will do as Lieutenant Governor, and what's most important. You had talked about faculty. Well, let's talk about role models, okay? So growing up, I didn't have a lot of role models that were doctors that looked like me, but I happened to meet one in Mundo Fimbres. He's an optometrist, and I got inspired. Well, guess what? The faculty needs to reflect and look like us so that when they teach young individuals that look like all of us. It's important. To not only look like us, it's got to be a diverse. Think about the number of women that we don't have that are tenured, that are in faculty positions, okay? But guess where it starts? Guess where this starts? This starts at the top. It starts out with the regents and the Board of Trustees. And I'll tell you how we can make those changes at the regents level. The regents are appointed by the governor, but they're ratified by the Senate, and they go through a confirmation process in the Rules Committee. We need to diversify the regents to reflect who we are today, because I'm going to tell you, here's who the average regent is. They're wealthy, they come in private jets, and they have no idea what the average student goes through. So if I see a regent that I think doesn't reflect that, I will go on the Senate floor, I'll go to the Rules Committee, and I will advocate to make sure we change the culture of the regents. So yes, we need to change the look of our faculty, but that's not going to happen unless we change it at the top and send a very strong message. And it has to be at the top.
Great. So we have a question from Ana Antuna. She's a student at USC as well and a member of one of our strong partner organizations, SoCal Can. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. On behalf of SoCal Can, we want to ask, how do you plan on being an effective member of the UC Board of Regents and the CSU Board of Trustees? What can university stakeholders expect from your leadership? And as a Lieutenant Governor, what would you like your higher education legacy to be?
So what I would like my legacy to be is one of, if I get elected and if I serve all 8 years, when I'm done, somebody says, Ed Hernandez was a champion for higher education. But here's an example I'm going to give you. You heard the story about why I ran for office, because I was angry about our healthcare system. I would pose to you, ask anybody in the healthcare field from all aspects of the work I've done. There's very few people in this state or in this country has done for healthcare in California than I have. And that's because I've been literally dedicated to trying to make that cause and have that happen. What I want to do as Lieutenant Governor, and why I shared with you my story of how important higher education is make that my next legacy. But what will I do as far as a regent? Exactly what I'm doing now is challenge the status quo and challenge the regents and ask the tough questions. I'll give you an example. Janet Napolitano came into my office a few weeks ago. And, you know, in anticipation of either myself or my opponent winning, you know, she wanted to make sure that we have a relationship, and I obviously have worked with her. And I immediately challenged her because it took me and the Senate Health Committee to push through the federal waiver to get the UCs to take more Medi-Cal patients. Well, guess what? Medi-Cal patients come from the poorest communities, and the UC was not seeing its fair share of patients. They weren't. The other thing, too, is I challenged her also in everything we were talking about, diversifying and having faculty that look like the state of California. And we had a very robust and intense conversation. And then when she left, she said, well, good luck, you know, hope you become a regent. And I told her, I go, well, you may not want to have me because I'm going to be asking you some tough questions. But that's what I'm going to do as lieutenant governor. Everybody's fanning. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's a little warm here. So I'm going to invite and introduce Jessie Ryan, who serves as our Executive Vice President at the Campaign for College Opportunity. She is the champion that essentially ensured that the associate degree for transfer became into law in our state, has been a huge advocate on remedial education, and we were very engaged in ensuring the student success funding formula got passed so that community colleges would not only get more money, but when they get it, they'd get more if they serve low-income students, and they'd get more when they ensure that those students complete a certificate or transfer. Before Jessie comes up, though, I actually want to talk to you about community colleges a little bit more. I'd like to get your impression of some of these real, huge, historic changes and reforms that have happened. How do you feel about them, having been a community college student?
You know, I think they're important. I kind of look at it like local control funding that we pass for the budget for K through 12, and where did the emphasis go on the resources or the additional resources? Communities that had free and reduced, foster care, guess what? The communities that we're talking about, community college, where those kids are going to be going to. And I think if we're going to have putting resources in, and if we have a much larger conversation with the public, it has to be in the most neediest and where we need to put resources in. Those kids with food insecurity, that can't afford housing, that can't afford transportation, childcare. That's where we need to put resources.
Thank you. So Jessie, everybody welcome Jessie. She is my partner in crime.
So Michelle missed the two most important attributes. I am a proud product of California community colleges, and I was also made in the CSU. I want to just thank again the students who were so eloquent and brilliant in the questions that they asked. When I have an opportunity to hear from student leaders like those that we just heard from tonight, it gives me great hope that the future of California is in good hands. So let's give them one more round of applause. As you know, while Senator Hernandez has been answering questions, we've been accepting questions from other partners in the audience around pressing issues in higher education. And so we have a few themes that have emerged and questions that we're going to share with Senator Hernandez. I think we often have heard the statement that budgets are a statement of our values. So one of the first questions comes from Max Lubin from Rise, California. Each year, California spends more on incarceration despite a declining population of state inmates. At the same time, we still spend less on higher education than before the recession. Why is that, and what would you do about it?
I agree. Budgets are statements of our values. And I'm going to share with you what we've done, at least whether it's through the recessionary or the good times, through the good economic times, is we have always advocated, when I say we, as a caucus, whether it's in the Assembly or the Senate, to fully restore higher education, put more money into community college. But at the end of the day, you know, it is a compromise and it's a negotiation with the administration. And I think it goes back to our original question and statement is the highest priority for me is to reach out and make sure that this new administration prioritizes higher education. And yes, it's correct. We do, unfortunately, spend more money to incarcerate. We need to flip that, and we need to put resources into keeping young adults out of prison, because the road to economic success in this state and this country is through higher education.
Thank you. We have heard quite often this idea that California was once the golden state because of our higher education system and because of the promise we made that all students who wanted access to public post-secondary would have that opportunity irrespective of their socioeconomic status. The campaign found in Access Denied that opportunity for access is growingly sparse. We have a question that says the CSU is the largest four-year public university system in the U.S. and has had to turn away 31,000 eligible students in the last year alone. How are you going to ensure that proper resources are allocated to these universities in order to keep that California promise?
So again, going back to the master plan and what it was originally designed for, and for those of you who don't know, in the original master plan, but it was never put into statute, is that if you are a California resident, your education is free. Well, obviously that has not occurred. And that's why, again, we have to readdress the master plan to make sure that, number one, we prioritize, but also, and I'm not a broken record, but it's a different California in the 60s than it is today, with different concerns, different problems, different challenges. It's much, much more diverse, and it's much, much more beautiful of who we are as a state, that what we have to do is figure out strategically, like I said, having the conversation, changing the master plan, prioritizing, and make sure that all students have access to education.
I think we've talked a lot tonight about the real cost of college and it being so much more than tuition. We know that there is an affordable housing crisis in California and that perhaps it's most gravely impacting our students. What is your commitment to increase affordable housing for students in California at colleges and universities across the state?
So let's first talk about the housing problem that we have in the state overall. I say this all the time, we're victims of our own success in the state of California because we're busting at the seams. We're pushing 40 million people. We're just not building enough units. And it's real simple economics, supply and demand. There's just not enough supply for the demand that there is. The legislature is trying to address it. It's trying to address it in a bigger global way, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously the Bell bill, the Atkins bill, and the Wiener bill, which I all supported, which we did last year. But I think what you have to do is isolate and look at colleges and universities and figure out how, as I mentioned earlier in the question I answered, part of the answer is not just tuition, but it's also housing. And how do we get additional dollars to subsidize so that individuals could be able to afford the housing, along with strategically working statewide to look at increase in the number of housing units?
We've talked about education as being a pipeline out of poverty for many in California. We know that we have a population in California, a significant population with some college but no degree, often adults. This population is critical to reaching our college attainment goal and closing the workforce gap. In fact, we can't do it unless we help serve that population. What policies would you champion specifically to target these students?
We have a couple problems. We have pipeline problems where somebody, I think the young individual that came in earlier from the community college says the number of kids going to community colleges that aren't actually transferring or going to a CSU or a UC. We have other multiple problems where we have a capacity issue, where we have a lot of kids trying to get into a system and there's just not enough spots. You know, we're talking about changing the admission rates, whatever. But we still, at the end of the day, we have to look at the most vulnerable. We have to look at breaking down barriers. We have to look at eliminating those barriers, like I said, with regard to the college entrance exam, looking at how we're going to get resources to those individuals. But we have to look at those efficient ways, and as we all work together to be able to do that.
Thank you. So we have our final two questions. I think you have read in the media that there's been some criticism in the past that past lieutenant governors have not always attended board meetings for the various boards that they have sat on and yielded that power accordingly. What is your commitment to attending board meetings and being a fully participating member?
Unless I'm sick, I will be there.
Okay. We'll hold you to it. We actually had a couple different questions specific to our undocumented student population. We know that our undocumented student population in California and in fact across the country is very much feeling under attack. What would you do to ensure that we have funding and supports for our undocumented student population, key to also meeting future economic prosperity in California and beyond?
Again, look at what we did in the past, and what I consider that we will continue to do is make sure that DACA students have access to scholarship. They have access to education, higher education. This last budget cycle, and unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure, I think it wasn't put in the final negotiations. There was additional money put in by the Latino caucus, which I supported and voted, to make sure that there's more money for individuals who are undocumented to be able to get legal services. We have to do everything we can to make sure that everyone is welcomed in this state, whether it's supporting SB 54, the sanctuary state. We have to make sure that, I'll give you another example. I'm a healthcare provider. We still have our offices open. I talk to the community clinics that we interact with on a daily basis. In the past, patients would come in without insurance. We would look for a home for them, a medical home. We would try to get them signed up for Medi-Cal. Guess what's happening? Patients aren't coming in. They're not coming in because they're afraid that they're going to get deported. We cannot do that. I mean, obviously, I would never do this. So the point is, everybody needs to feel safe in this state and this country.
So I have another question before I invite one of my favorite people in this room up. But, there are rumors that sometimes people just run for the lieutenant governor because they really want to become the next governor of California. So are you interested in becoming a governor of California?
So if you look at the Constitution of the state of California, it clearly says the role of what the lieutenant governor is. They sit on the boards, what we mentioned, the CSU Board of Trustees, the UC Board of Regents, the Lands Commission, Economic Development Commission. Let me just close with this and to answer your question indirectly. I have governed. I have governed for the last 12 years, and I know what it takes. And to answer the question about showing up to boards and commissions, if you look at my record, other than the days I was sick, I've gone to every committee hearing, read every bill, sat in every committee, and have taken my job very, very serious. Governing is difficult, especially in the 5th largest economy in the world and as diverse as it is. Also, the Constitution says that in the event that the governor is not available, the lieutenant governor becomes governor. I am capable of taking over the spot to become governor.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that was direct. We'll take that. Maybe one final question is, you have a seat on the UC Board of Regents and the Cal State Board of Trustees, but not on the Community College Board of Governors, where the majority of California college students go. Do you think you should have a seat there?
And I think that's a conversation we should have. But, if we have a little bit more time, I'd like to talk to you about a constitutional amendment I try to put forward, okay, which it was able to get passed or get out of committee because of the opposition from UC. The UC Board of Regents is, like I said, they're made up of appointments. Well, I had a constitutional amendment would have changed that, which meant it would have went to the vote of the people, because the UC Regents is enshrined in our Constitution. The legislature can't change it. We can't do it through statute. And if it would have gone to the voters, and if the voters would have passed it, it would have changed the makeup would have changed the terms, their term limits, so they wouldn't be 12 years. It would have also taken away 2 and added 2 faculty. It would have taken away 2, added 2 students that have it didn't get out. And it would have permanently added the community college chancellor on it, which he happens to be on now because he was appointed before. Because we need to be able to communicate. But it just goes to show you the tough issues that I've taken on, and it wasn't able to get out of committee. But those are the conversation I'll have. And then, yes, maybe we should have a conversation that I should be in the Community College Board, because we're all one system.
Great. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Chris Nellum up. He's with EdTrust West, statewide focused organization on equity in K-12 and higher education, and one of our co-host for today.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Senator. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Chris Nellum. I'm with Ettrus West. Ettrus West is a civil rights and educational equity organization. We're committed to closing equity gaps in this generation. So I'm really excited to be here tonight for a number of reasons. The first is personal. I'm from the Imperial Valley, Brawley, California. I'm not sure many people know where that is. And it's not often that people from where I'm from get an opportunity to be in a room like today, and let alone be here but share anything about our story or about our valley. The valley, everywhere you look, poverty is pervasive. We have 6 prisons in our community. We share the border with Mexicali, so we share our experience of poverty with folks on the border and experiences of immigration. We also share the experience of folks not really having the opportunity to go to college. But in places like that, there's one thing that we don't lack. We don't lack people who work hard. You know, people there work in fields who probably put food on the tables that we ate off of today. But what is the real thing there is this sense that opportunity is limited, that it's finite, and that folks are lucky if you have the opportunity to go to college. And so I'm excited to be here tonight to talk about this campaign. It's an important one, as Michelle mentioned, and as Helen mentioned, for the future of higher education in our state. And so it's great. It's always great for me to be in a room with folks who are committed so that no young person, no young Chris Nellum grows up, you know, feeling that opportunity is limited. So we heard about some of these things tonight. The students shared that affordability is a big issue for us. We need to figure out as a state how to address non-tuition cost. Michelle reminded us that we need a state attainment goal, and we need better data systems to help us get there. We need a more coordinated higher education system, both public and private, to help us get there. We heard about the senator's own motivations for being committed to this work, growing up in La Puente, and understanding that folks have limited opportunities. And so we all need to be committed to this issue, for we all know this. I think the longer I do this work, I realize how special it is to have conversations about equity in the context of higher education. And so my invitation to all of us when we leave here tonight is to remember to think boldly, to remember that this conversation should not be special. We should carry with us this commitment to have a conversation about equity in the context of higher education. And I think a question we all need to ask ourselves is, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. We're home to Silicon Valley, you know, the hotbed of innovation. Why can't we have the most equitable higher education system in the world? We can. We're California. And I can say I'm happy to be back in California after being gone for some time. So I wanted to close out, say thank you, Senator Hernandez, for sharing so authentically with us tonight, sharing with us your passion for this work. Of course, to Michelle and the campaign, the Campaign for College Opportunity, for the invitation and for hosting, and also to our very talented students for helping us engage on such an important conversation tonight. And last but not least, all of you for being here tonight. And again, I invite you to think boldly and really to carry with you the commitment to having conversations about equity in any room that we're in. It shouldn't be a special conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I make a response?
Yes.
So, first of all, you should run for office.
No. Never.
I want to share a story with you that kind of hits on what you said, and what I want to end with is hope. Okay.
I love it.
Yeah. Well. Hope. Yeah. You know, running statewide, I know my district like the back of my hand, but over the last 2.5 years, this is this incredible state. I've been everywhere, including your area, but I want to share with you a story similar to the Imperial Valley. It was in the Central Valley. Okay. I was invited to speak with some high school students in a small community, a farming community, called Tranquility. Have anybody ever heard of it? Yes. Yeah. Okay. And I was on my way between the 99 and the 105 or the 5, and I was cutting across. It was the 5, right? Yeah. Now the 105 is over here. Anyway, I was cutting across and I stopped there, but I got there early, and I was this teacher that was a city council member invited me to speak to his students, and I got there and I did my homework. It was 100% free and reduced, and this car pulls up, and this young lady gets out. And I started talking to her. I go, oh, you're here to meet me? He goes, yes, I want to talk to you. I want to hear what's going on. I go, tell me about yourself. Well, I just got accepted to UC, not Riverside, UC Davis. Okay, great. Who's that with you? That's my dad. Well, I'd love to talk to your dad. The dad comes out, and all in Spanish. I was talking to him, thank you for bringing your daughter. And in Spanish, he said, yeah, you know, I had to come out of the fields, and I took her out of the fields to come here. So I was talking to this man, and in Spanish I said, you should be very proud that your daughter is going to university. And then he told me this in Spanish. Pues mi hija grande está en Berkeley. Is that not the American way that a farm worker, 2 kids are in college? And then I'm going to share what happened. I spoke to these kids in there, and there were these incredible young adults. I said, what is the biggest concern you have? Guess what they all said? They were afraid their parents were going to get deported. That is why we're here. We need to get angry and make sure that doesn't happen. So I needed to share that with you. This guy should run for office.
You have your first endorsement. Thank you, Senator Hernandez. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.